Hello, all, and welcome back to another episode of Movies and Us, a weekly gathering place filled with conversations about movies, stories, and connection. My name is Jennifer Hahn.
And I'm Sarah Callan.
And today we are going to be reviewing the film Ferrari. All right, Sarah, kick us off with an IMDb summary for Ferrari.
Set in the summer of 1957, with Enzo Ferrari's auto empire in crisis, the ex-racer turned entrepreneur pushes himself and his drivers to the edge as they launch into the Mille Miglia, a treacherous 1,000-mile race across Italy.
All right. And in Movies and Us tradition, for the last time in 2023 as well, this is our last recording of the year, which is kind of neat. Let's do our one-sentence summaries for Ferrari. Sarah, what was yours?
Mine is, maybe all gas, no brakes isn't the best life motto. Just maybe. We're not sure. Maybe.
Maybe not. I think this film has a point of view on that one, though. But yeah, nice. My one-sentence summary is, behind every great man is a Laura Ferrari.
Nice. Yes. Shout out to Laura. She is the best.
Okay, let's dive in with our initial thoughts of Ferrari, and we will not spoil this movie in this first section. So, Sarah, I'm intrigued to hear if Ferrari worked for you or not.
Yeah, this didn't work for me. It's fine. I think that there are some choices that this movie makes that I don't think work super well. There's some things, like little things with the production and the cinematography and the sound design that didn't like quite work for me. Some of the story pacing felt off for me. Like there were elements of it that I was like, this doesn't feel right to me. I think there are some things that it does well, but I've also seen those things done better in other movies. So I don't know. Maybe I was judging Ferrari a little bit more harshly than I should have been, but I don't know. For me, this is kind of a middling movie, with the standout being Penelope Cruz. She is great in this.
Yes.
So I hope that she gets loads of recognition because she is quite good in this, and she was the highlight of this movie for me.
Can we get a movie about Laura Ferrari, please?
Hello. Yes.
You know?
I want that.
It's so interesting. I don't know if this is typical of every year or it just feels like it extra much this year, but I feel like there's been a lot of biopics or films based on true events that we've gotten to experience this past year. Does it feel like it's been more than in a previous year? There's been a lot, especially in the past couple months too.
Yeah, there has been a lot. I don't know that there's necessarily been more than in previous years, but there's been a lot this year. But I feel like there's always a lot, so I don't know.
Yes. Yeah. So anyway, I this movie, it's okay. I think that there are some things that are really interesting choices and some themes that seem to be part of the thesis and the thematic elements of this movie. But there's a lot just that felt a little bit bland to me. And it really, in the past couple of months, just been thinking a lot about like what makes a great biopic. And I think we've seen some great examples of that in the past year. We've seen some not so great examples, but I think a great biopic often is telling the story of, you know, a person or a set of people, but there's often these larger universal themes that somehow the film is able to invite us into. And I didn't feel like Ferrari did that. And I think that's a miss. There's some things that you can maybe try and extrapolate out, but overall, I don't think that this movie has maybe enough that it wants to say, or at least if it's trying to say something, it's not clear and focused to me on which of those aspects it's looking to really communicate. I think there's a lot of themes that you could pull out from this around like like moral responsibility and the corporate ambitions of people and men. And there's a lot of like relational dynamics. This is really like a family drama more than it is focused on this company in a lot of ways. So there's a lot there, but I don't. It's not clear to me what this movie's trying to say, and I think that's my biggest qualm with it. Um, there's some characters that have accents that really bothered me throughout the movie as well,
Oh my gosh, yes.
which I'm sure we will talk about. But you know, all in all, it was fun to see my dude, Adam Driver, whom I love as an actor, just being a cool Italian silver fox. Like that I was, I'll pay money for that.
Well, and it's a good reminder that if you want to look extra cool, you just need to wear your sunglasses indoors. That just exponentially increases your cool factor. And
Mhm.
he nailed it.
He did. He did. It fit the brand. It fit the vibe. Uh,
Yes.
yeah, I never thought I would imagine Adam Driver as a like chic Italian man, but here we are with his hair slicked back and everything,
Mm,
and it
yep.
works.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it does.
So those are some wonderful things for my brain to ruminate on that this movie gave me. So that's a win in my books.
That's great. I love that you got to experience this movie. You know, there's been a few other Adam Driver movies that have come out in the past couple of years
Yeah.
that we didn't get a chance to review and weren't quite good. So we dodged bullets there. So I'm glad that we got to see this movie for you.
Yes. Yes. And I was thinking about during this movie just kind of the movie and role choices that he's been making over the past couple of years has been just pretty fascinating. I think he's kind of in his exploration phase where he's just trying out all different types of roles. He's an action star in one and, playing like a moody um, character piece in another, and just the range he's exploring is also pretty fascinating to see. So here's another step on his exploration journey that he's going on. I'm here for it.
Yep.
Okay, so let's include a spoiler. If you haven't seen Ferrari, it is available out in theaters. We recommend getting to check it out before continuing to listen to the rest of this episode. Um, while we're on the topic of going to see this out in theaters, I watched this. Granted, it was a Tuesday, so discount Tuesday during the week between Christmas and New Year's, and my theater was packed. It was packed at like 3 p.m. on a Tuesday. And this is not the fun, floofy, take your family to go out to see a movie type of movie that you want to see in the holidays. Like it's pretty, visually dark, thematically dark. Like there's a lot. It's moody and depressing in a lot of ways. So that was just some interesting choices. I wonder if people left the theater expecting a different movie than the one that they got, because you hear the name Ferrari and you expect some like great racing scenes, like some sophisticated, period stuff that's happening where you get transported into this world in Italy and all that. But this movie is quite depressing to be watching during the holidays. So that was just kind of some interesting choices, and then some interesting thoughts around like the marketing of this movie as well. But you had a very different experience in the theater.
I did. I did. I went on a Wednesday morning at a 9:40 showing, and I was the only person in my theater, and it was great and I loved it.
Love it. I love it. That's the best. That's the best when that happens, when you walk in and not a soul is in sight and the movie is just about to start because the
Oh,
previews are wrapping up and the chances that somebody else will walk in are very low at that point. That's the
yeah. It
best.
was great. But I did wonder if having a full theater, because there is something really magical about watching a movie in a theater with other people, because
Mhm.
then you're also feeding off of their reactions to things. So if the crowd is really enjoying the movie and you're maybe not enjoying it as much, you might be more tempted to like get swept up in their excitement, and it might make those racing scenes more exciting and more heart pounding. And you know, when the crash happens, you'd hear gasps across the theater, so when you're alone, it might detract a little bit from that experience. So I did
Mhm.
wonder, like, would I have enjoyed this movie a little bit more if the theater had been full? Because then I would have been responding to their response to the movie. I don't know,
Mhm.
but
Mhm.
I love having the theater to myself, so I was happy.
It either needs to be like a pure private showing or
Mhm.
we need a packed theater, you know? Like,
Yeah.
let's not do the little sprinkling ones. Those are less fun. We either want the full experience or we want to be by ourselves.
Yeah. That's accurate.
There were definitely lots of gasps in that scene, especially because the sound cuts out. Let's
Yeah.
actually talk about that scene. Yeah, the sound cuts out, and it is such a contrast to the engines roaring for the past 10 minutes of that very long racing sequence, and you could audibly hear all of the gas for sure. I think there's another scene earlier in the movie where the sound also cuts out. I forget which moment it is. Um, but that one, just lots of chewing, lots of candy wrappers, lots of popcorn crunching in that one. But yeah, the theater definitely audibly was reacting, and you could hear like the women in the back going, "Oh my goodness!" Like all of the guttural reactions were really really fascinating to see. That is silent in that scene, absolutely silent.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, it really is, and I I find that fascinating. So, like,
Mhm.
the roller coaster of emotions that I went on during that scene, all alone in my theater, was like, oh no, this is because in the trailer you
Mhm.
saw the crash. And so I was like, I've been waiting for this crash that I've seen in the trailer before. So then
Oh,
when it cuts out to silent, I was like, oh, this is where that crash is going to happen. And then seeing the car like mow through all of the people, then it's like the oh my gosh, wow, cuz I know that this is based on a true story. And so it's like, oh my gosh, all of these people were taken out in real life during this race. That's insane. And then laughter, because it was so over the top with all
yeah,
the bodies. Also, I'm pretty sure that one of them was like, I mean, obviously, like they're like dummies interspersed. But like one of them, the skin looked like really, really yellow to me. And I was
yeah,
like, you couldn't get like a normal flesh tone dummy to be in your pile of bodies. So I was distracted by that. And then you see the driver, like half of his body splatted on
yeah.
the pavement. And that I found funny because it looked so just unrealistic. And I don't know, just the whole thing. I was like, really? We're being so sensational and exploitative of these people's death
Mhm.
and just showing carnage in this way, like it's a spectator sport. So then it turned into laughter and like, oh, okay, I'm done with this. But I thought it was really fascinating because we had just watched The Iron Claw. And
Yes.
even though that
Yes.
movie didn't work for me as well as it worked for you, I love how honoring The Iron Claw was to this family and all of the tragedies that they endured. And it's still dramatic, and you're still shocked by what's going on, and every loss is impactful. And then you have this, which is just like carnage of bodies. Look at people sprayed across. You got limbs everywhere. You got half a torso. Like, I
Yeah.
don't know, just seeing the contrast between the two,
Yep.
and I think the Iron Claw is much more classy in the way that it handles real life tragedies that happened, whereas Ferrari is just like, look at all these bodies, which I don't know, that didn't feel great to me.
No, it's such a fabulous point, and I was going to bring up the Iron Claw as well because they are so different in their approach. I think this is the perfect example of smart versus sensationalized filmmaking, which is that ironically showing all of those bodies, and actually in that scene Ferrari shows the car ramming into those bodies with terrible CGI. Like the CGI on that just
Oh,
looks
yeah.
so bad. The way that the bodies are flung around, the speed of that is wrong. It doesn't look right. It just looks like terrible CGI. And ironically, it creates less of an emotional impact because we're focused on the wrong thing. I think that there's a version of that scene where you see the car, you see the tire get slashed, and you just cut to the reactions of the people that are not killed, right? Like there's a
Mhm.
shot, I think, of the mother and the family running
Yeah.
out, and
Yeah.
cognitively you've just seen the family together at breakfast or at their meal, right? And now you see that contrast. Like that's the emotional gut punch, not the shots of the bodies. Which this so then it's just like a perfect example of the way that this film actually doesn't fully understand what we need as a viewer to invest, to connect, to feel the weight of the emotions. And it's ironic because the less you show, if you focus on showing the right things, it's actually far more powerful than literally giving us um, the carnage. And you're right. There will be all of us in the theater like you. They're just focused on the wrong things, and our cognitive attention span is now drawn away from the emotions of the moment because we're just thinking about the terrible CGI and kind of the sensationalized visuals.
Yeah, and I think I don't know, when you show carnage like that, it's
Mm-hmm.
hard to be as emotionally invested. Like in a weird way, it's
Yep.
easier to like disassociate and be like, "Oh, well, that's a weird thing that happens." Whereas if you're more emotionally invested in like the characters, for example, then that might be more impactful. But even then, I don't think you need to show all of these people being maimed and
Mm-hmm.
murdered by a car.
Yep.
Uh, I don't know. And then because the whole movie is focused on Ferrari, and he is this like ruthless businessman who has emotionally shut himself off from everything, then you're watching this and you're going, how is he going to respond to this? What is his responsibility? What is his company going to do to try and, you can never make this right, but like do something to help these families? But I don't know. I watching this movie, I was like, Ferrari's not a good guy.
Nope.
So I don't trust that he's going to do right by these people. So then it made me like dislike him even more. I don't know. I wasn't sure what to do with this movie and what to do with our protagonist. Even though I think he's kind of like an antagonist in some ways. But I don't know, that whole crash just, it didn't work for me when that should have been like the most emotional moment. I don't know. It didn't
Mm-hmm.
work.
Mm-hmm. No, I think it's a really great point because the I don't think the movie gives enough. See, this is where I go back to I don't think this film is focused enough because that in and of itself, the unpacking the theme around like the moral responsibility and kind of maybe the gray areas of it and the ways that Enzo tries to um, maybe soothe his own sense of guilt, or maybe there isn't any sense of responsibility there, which is also kind of an interesting uh, trait about this in this movie around the portrait of a real life figure. But this focusing on that in and of itself for this film, the lead up and the ways that we've seen him shirk responsibility in the past or whatnot, and then the ways that him and Laura respond to that in the aftermath of it, like that in and of itself is a fascinating film that can unpack a lot of these themes around like responsibility and guilt and the things that we choose to avoid and soothe ourselves in, or we step up in, and how we deal with that, and how that is involved and integrated somehow into these corporate entities and the complexities there. Like but the film barely resolves that whole like emotional gut punch that comes from that crash scene. It's maybe a few conversations afterwards. We see some reporters reacting, and then there's that one pivotal conversation between him and Laura with the money to pay off the reporters. And then it's maybe like one line of white text on the screen at the end of the movie. Like it doesn't fully spend enough time resolving, unpacking, and wrapping that through line up in a way that I feel like is worthy of the emotional emphasis that the movie has for that scene. So then you're like, well, I thought you were interested in this thing, but as a movie, maybe you're not. And so then what are you interested in? I think one of the biggest flaws of this film is that there isn't a focus on a specific aspect. We kind of get these smatterings of things, but we are set up for some to expect resolution or at least an unpacking of certain themes that kind of get, just brushed aside. And I think that is a little bit I think confusing as a viewer because we're set up and we're prepared and primed for something that doesn't ever come.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. So I have two alternate pitches for this movie for you. Obviously, it would have to be directed by a different person, but okay. Idea number one
Okay.
is the scope of the movie is just after that crash. So we don't see the crash, but we see the after effects of it. And then it is that exploration of who Ferrari is as he is responding to this crisis. And it is a deep character study of this man responding to this tragedy while also fighting the fires for his business, yada, yada, blah, blah, blah. So I think that would get to some of that emotional core, getting to that like corporate responsibility stuff, like get into all of these weightier themes because the scope is narrower.
I like it. I like it. And there's could be a lot in there with like the unraveling of the relational shift
Mm,
between him and Laura and what that
yes.
means for them and their negotiation. There could be so many great scenes just in that little study of
Right?
theirs, with the leather chairs, just have them just go at it with each other. I think that would be amazing. Give Penelope Cruz more screen time.
Oh, yes.
Her to
Give
be
her
like
all the screen time.
spicy and yeah, and a visionary for him.
So then my other idea for this movie is that the primary focus is on these two women. Keep Penelope Cruz. Shailene Woodley would need to be replaced with somebody else. Um, but focus on the two women. And I see this more as like an artsy fartsy movie where like Enzo is almost like a ghost that is haunting their lives, and you see the after effects of him being there, but you're really focusing on these two women as they're navigating this kind of impossible situation that they both find themselves in. And so then you learn more about the two women and you learn more about the culture of Italy at the time, because I think at that time Italy had really strict uh, laws around divorce. And so that's part of the reason why Enzo couldn't acknowledge his son. And so you could really grapple with some of these larger cultural things that these two women were facing, in addition to being character studies of the two women.
I love that. So this is like women talking meets
Exactly. Yes.
Italy in the 1950s. And
Yeah,
what's
pretty
great
much.
about that version is that Lena and Laura are such foils to each other. And
Yes.
their strengths are so different and what they give and can provide from a fame like with Enzo as well is so different. They fulfill different needs in him, but also like just the way that they deal with conflict, the way they deal with difficult situations are so different. And I think both so it would paint such an interesting perspective of like what being a woman means and the many different versions of what that can look like. Man, throw the mom in there too. I wanted more of the
Ooh,
mom. She
yes.
was so funny.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wouldn't that be great though? You call this movie Ferrari, throw in some
Mhm.
racing scenes in there, and then get all of the like middle-aged men to the theater and ta-da! Here's a movie that you didn't expect.
Oh, it's a bait and switch.
It
That's
totally
amazing.
is. Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. Let's do it. Let's find somebody to make this movie.
Yeah, that would be really fascinating. That'd be really fascinating. And I think that's the problem with this movie is I actually think that this movie's more interested in the family drama of the the Ferrari family. If you look at like the way this movie starts and ends, it's about the family. It's Shakespearean in a lot of ways around um, this child from another woman, and is he legitimate? Do we acknowledge him? You know, Enzo's juggling all of the family dynamics in his life as well as his corporate responsibilities as head of this company. But the movie's not about Ferrari really. I think all of those racing scenes and moments where they're discussing the company are really just ways to usher in a perspective of who this man is and how he operates in his private life. And I think that this movie basically, maybe it's a marketing play, but tries to like have its cake and eat it too. Um, by including those racing scenes, it kind of fulfills what people maybe are in the theater for, but it also really is not interested in that at all. This is such a contrast to Ford versus Ferrari, which like really knows what it is and what it's trying to do and what it's delivering to the viewers, which is just this testosterone filled like adrenaline rush for basically a 2 hour movie, and it's very highly effective at that. There's not a lot of heavy themes. It's the characters are pretty straightforward and you're just there for the thrills. I think Ferrari's trying to do both, and it kind of is basically ineffective at doing both because you inevitably can't include all of that and do all of the both of those sides of the story well.
Yeah. Yeah, I was really struggling throughout this movie to figure out what it was trying to accomplish, and I kept getting confused because I think that the racing scenes are better than the other scenes, except for the scenes with Penelope Cruz in them because she's incredible. Um, and so it was hard for me because I was like, okay, I'm enjoying these racing scenes more because I think in some ways they're better, though not always. Uh, but we don't spend a lot of time racing. It's really focused on these families, but I'm not really learning anything from this. So I'm not sure. I wasn't sure what we were doing. And I also kept comparing this to Ford v Ferrari. And while I didn't super enjoy that movie, I think it's a lot more effective, especially in those racing scenes. And so there were certain moments with what I remember most about Ford v Ferrari is the sound design because it was so incredible. I didn't watch Ford v Ferrari in theaters. I watched it on my crappy little laptop, and still I was overwhelmed by the sound design in that. And I feel like Ferrari was trying to replicate that, but I don't think it does it as effectively. Um, and so that was while I was watching, I kept comparing it to Ford v Ferrari. And then I was wondering if I was maybe being a little too harsh to Ferrari instead of just like judging it in its own, trying to compare it to another movie that I've seen do it better. So I'm not, I don't know. I don't know what to do with Ferrari. It's a little bit of a muddled mess for me.
Yeah, yeah. No, I felt the same way with the racing scenes, especially that big racing sequence, the end with the race through Italy. But it was 1,000 mile race. Um,
Hmm.
that felt so long to me. It's like
Oh
this
yeah.
is when
It
this
lasts
is not
forever.
working well. When I'm just like, okay, and here's another shot. Here's the overhead shot of the cars, and here's the shot by the tires of the cars, and there's just even regardless of the sound design, I think even the cinematography and the editing of that sequence
Oh
is just
yeah.
not well executed. So
Nope.
it's never good when your racing sequence feels like a slog. That's not the goal. It should feel like seconds have passed by in a 10-minute long sequence because you were just on the edge of your seat. But um, I think that the way that it's edited is quite slow and quite like methodical, and that it's just beat after beat of changing the angle that we're viewing the race from. And the other problem with that racing sequence is I don't think that there's enough setup for us to really understand, maybe the rivalries or the stakes, or the processes around like that tire. Like they should have played that up so much more. I mean, this is the cornerstone of every great action sequence, is that there's got to be some rules of how that whatever they're about to execute is going to work, so that we understand and then we can see the stakes happening cognitively and visually. um, that gets us invested, because without that we're just watching shots of beautiful overhead shots of cars, and it's great, but that gets real boring real fast. So I feel like we needed a little bit more setup for that race sequence, a little more details, a little bit more understanding of who's who, what their personalities are like, what their tendencies might be, what's maybe wrong with the cars, what could go wrong, and then watch that play out.
Yeah, yeah, it's almost like the movie is it's one of those that gives you too much information and not enough at the same time.
Yeah.
So it almost seems like it's trying to be a movie for people who understand cars and know the story, but also being like too basic in some of that to be interesting. So I think that you're absolutely right. I feel like the movie tries to set up the stakes for the race, and you understand how this is super important for Enzo financially, and how like they need to win this race in order for this company to survive. But you're right, I wish that they would have taken it a little bit more detailed and like given us more information about the race. So if that's going to be our focus, cut out some of the family drama stuff and actually take us through what this race is and why it's so important, why it's so dangerous too, instead of just showing us a bunch of cars racing that were kind of boring. Like there were multiple points where
Yes.
like where like one car would like pass another, and I'm like, okay, in racing there's ways that you can block that and like make that more exciting, and like are they
Mm-hmm.
going to be able to pass, and then somebody blocks them, and you can show like the teamwork of the drivers who are on the same team, because they'll also work together to make sure that one racer wins,
Mm.
and they have each other's back even though they're competing against each other. So there's all sorts of interesting things that you can do with that to make those shots more exciting. But I wish that they would have also gone into like the terrain and the weather and
Mm.
how that affects everything that you're doing, because that will affect your tire pressure, it'll affect the quality of your tires, how long they last, like all of these things about the car change based on your terrain and the environment, and all of that could have made that so much more exciting. But instead,
Mm-hmm.
we're it's almost like this weird like remedial version of this race where it's just like, look at the cars, they go vroom, like, and that's it, which doesn't, I don't know, it doesn't make it as exciting. So even if you're not a car person though, there's a way that you can explain these things. Like, I mean, I know, and I'm not a car person, that I need to get my tires changed every once in a while so that they keep
Yeah.
working. So cognitively, I can grasp those stakes because I have dealt with something similar-ish.
Mm.
But the movie isn't willing to give us those things to make that scene more exciting.
Yeah. No, that's a really great way of putting it. It's almost like, you can tell when you watch a film about music that the creators just have a love for music, right? Like the way that it's shot. I'm thinking about Damien Chazelle and many of his films, especially the ones that are about jazz, and you can just see the way that he films the musicians and the instruments and those shots. Like there is a love and affection and understanding of that craft and what to focus on, and what's captivating about it. This almost feels like that entire racing sequence was created, written, edited, filmed by people that just either don't know or do not love this aspect of, you know, high octane adrenaline rush car racing. I mean, just take a couple pages from the book of like any Fast and Furious movie, and honestly, they do it well.
Yeah.
nail it every time. You know what I mean? Like, we understand the stakes. There's emotional stakes for those race sequences. Are they the best shot? I mean, they're fine, but they get at the adrenaline rush. They know how to be
Yeah.
efficient and they nail it. And we're here for it. They've made what? How many movies? I don't even remember
10,
how.
right? Because now we're on Fast
Oh, yes,
X.
Fast
Oh,
X.
and
Yeah.
there's the little, like, spin-off too, so I guess
Okay, so
11
maybe
movies?
12 movies.
That's
And
so
every
many.
time we're still not bored of it. So
Yeah.
let's just maybe like outside consultant, Fast and Furious specialization in filming car racing scenes. But there's something about those details that are really exciting for us. And like you mentioned, they can play up that fuel stop. I think there's that one, there's maybe two
Yeah.
fuel stops.
Yeah.
That's actually where you could do a lot with like, hey, this part is faulty, and this is included in the movie, but it's just they spend like barely a couple seconds on it. But like, this fault is part is this part is faulty. This is gonna be a risk, but we're gonna make the trade off to go in to the next segment, the next leg, because we just got to keep going. But like, now as a viewer, I'm like, oh my gosh, your tire part is faulty, like, and then play up that
Mhm.
that whole thing, right?
Yeah.
And this movie does a little bit of that, but I mean, you make that real dramatic for me. I'm here to eat it up.
And I think another aspect of this is that just visually, both the Ferraris and the Maseratis were red.
Yeah.
And so it was difficult to discern who is who. And I understand, I don't know if all of those cars were red for the actual race, but just visually, that it would have been great if there was a clearer distinction between the two teams rather than just having to rely on. I kept looking at the front of the car because the Maserati, you could see the
Yes.
emblem on the front. And that was my like biggest visual cue of which car this was. But if the Maseratis had been a different color, that would have helped immensely to make these more interesting because then you don't have just
Mm-hmm.
a bunch of red cars grouped together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I was real confused the whole time. I was looking for
Yeah.
something. I feel like this is like me watching hockey. I'm like, what? I'm trying to follow the puck. I don't know where it is. It's somewhere in the mess of men out there. Same thing with this. Like,
Yeah.
there's two cars that are going at it, and they're neck and neck. Which car am I rooting for again? I don't know.
Yeah.
So let me just sit back in my seat and watch this unfold. Yeah. The other thing is that I think the movie spends quite a bit of time with creating emotional stakes with the drivers and them writing the letters the night before the race. There's that whole sequence with one of the drivers, the one that passes, I think, with his wife or his girlfriend or partner, and I think, I don't know, maybe there's a version of that could have worked better for me, but I don't know if there's emotional investment that I have in the drivers for that to be the key thing that this race's emotional stakes are. I think the bigger emotional stakes are, we've been following Enzo Ferrari and this family for the entire movie, and the stakes are that this company and their livelihood is dependent on this. Um, I don't know. I think the movie just spends so much time in that like the night before preparation by these drivers, and I'm like, I don't know anything about you yet. Like, we've seen a couple of scenes with you, but I'm not emotionally invested in you. And if we had spent more time focusing on the race and playing up the drivers and at least a couple more scenes with them, maybe that could have worked better. But I don't know, that didn't work for me. um I think cognitively I can see that this is like going to be dangerous, and so that's why they're writing their letters. But the movie spends quite a bit of just screen time with that aspect. I'm curious if that worked for you.
Yeah, I think it was one of those where I could see what the movie was trying to do and I could appreciate the attempt rather than it actually working. I think it goes back to some of what we were just saying. Like, if you don't know what this race is, and I wasn't familiar with it, like I knew that it was going to be a long race because Mille is 1,000. So I was like, okay, this is a really, really long, arduous race that we're going before, but I didn't know about the terrain. I didn't know a lot about what this was until I looked it up afterwards. And so I think if the movie had been more intentional to like, okay, these are the personal stakes of this race for Enzo and the company. Bet. Got it. Cool. This is what the race actually looks like, and these are the stakes for the drivers. Then that moment when they're writing those letters, I think could have been more impactful. I don't think that we needed to like learn about each of the drivers. I think if the film had done a better job of showing just how dangerous it is. And there are certain lines throughout where Enzo is like, I lost my friends, and people are talking about other drivers who have died, and we saw the driver die in their test earlier in the movie. So we know that it's dangerous, but I don't think that we know just how dangerous this race is. And I feel like if the film had set that up better, then that letter writing may have been more effective.
That's so true. That's so true. I know I keep talking about this one scene from Top Gun Maverick, and I will probably keep talking about this scene from Top Gun
No, it's
Maverick,
great. Go ahead.
but the like process scene where Tom Cruise is explaining the mission, and at this bend you need to do this. At this bend you need to do this. And if you don't do this, you're going to get shot at. If you don't do this in this right timing, you're going to blow up. If you don't do this here, this is what's going to happen to you. And we get it's quite an efficient scene. We get maybe a couple of minutes of it. I mean, granted, Top Gun Maverick goes all in on that because we get to see all of them practicing it. But
Mm-hmm.
even just that little like, okay, guys, this is what we're about to do. This is what's going to be executed. And if you don't, this is what will happen to you. We just needed some, like even a hair of something like that to get to those pieces, like you were saying. These are the bends. These are the 7 legs of this race. You're going to be going through towns. You're going to be going through countryside. You're going to be doing these big S turns on the side of a mountain. And if you miss this aspect, you fall off the mountain, whatever, whatever it is, like that.
Mm-hmm.
We needed the equivalent of Maverick explaining the mission to us so that we understand what's about to happen. And then inevitably, we also need to understand that when we get to those points, like there's not too much information, enough for us to remember, oh yes, that S turn on that one mountain range, this is the part. And just a couple of those, like 2 or 3, would have been sufficient. And you build up to like, oh, they're approaching that S turn. And here we go. There's the first car that goes. They make it okay. There's a second one that goes. They barely make it. Just something that gets us a little bit more focused on something, I think. Yeah. Where's
Yeah.
Maverick when we need him?
Where is Maverick? Come on. What are you doing? We need you in 1957 Italy to help this race situation.
And I'm sure he would
Um,
thrive in 1957 Italy. Yeah.
but and I think another aspect of that is, and we've already kind of touched on it, but even sharing about the different vehicles. So they were driving different makes of Ferrari. And so each of them has strengths and weaknesses. And so
Mm.
even getting into some of the like, okay, and this car is going to struggle here, or look
Oh,
out for
yeah.
this because it's going to respond differently in this portion. Like all of that would have helped. Even if you're not a car person, even if you're not a racing person, you can still understand those things, and the film can guide you so that you're more invested in every turn or every breakaway, and you also knowing where those pit stops are going to come too. So like you have to drive a certain way so that your car will make it to the next pit stop, so
Mm.
you can throw some wrenches into that process too. I don't know, there's a lot of things they could have done to make this race even more exciting.
Mm. Yeah. No, that's so good. That's so good. And then actually, it makes that scene, the crash scene, even more set up for, because you've
Mm-hmm.
seen how there's been so many little things that they've thought about and accounted for and that they're focused on, that they have to pay attention to. So when this one thing also goes wrong, like there's a little bit of a um, we've already emotionally been, in a good way, exhausted by all of the things that have gone wrong. And so by the time we get to that point, we too are like, man, and that one thing we forgot, or that one thing we thought we were good on because there's
Mm-hmm.
10 million others that we had to focus on. And that was the thing that was our downfall. Like that's a setup, you know? Then we are emotionally there and we feel the weight of that because they tried their best. They were thinking about 10 million other things to survive. Who knew there'd be a little, extra bump in the road in that one's part? Because
Mm-hmm.
we figured
Yeah.
we've been focused on the S turns and all of the other terrain that we had to manage.
Mm-hmm. Ugh, that would have
That'd
been
have been a great
so
movie.
much. Yeah, it would have been so much better.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that really is what it is. Like, our focus is so split for this 2 hour long movie, which at times really felt like a slog.
Yeah.
Uh, so that we aren't emotionally invested in anything because our attention is too divided over across too many things. So even though this, like, time frame wise, takes place in a year, I mean less than a year probably, I don't know what the exact scope is, but even though it was narrow in that regard, there's too many characters and we're too divided in our focus, so then nothing is really as impactful as it could have or should
Mm-hmm.
have been.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, that's so true. That's so true. Which goes back to like your two pitches for this movie. And there's probably like a third, which just give us the race movie, like give us the high octane adrenaline rush process
Mhm.
movie about this race. That's another
Yep,
version of this, and
it's great.
and through the preparation we get to see maybe aspects about who this person is, but the focus is on the race preparation, and through that we get ushered in all of these character moments with these people. Maybe that's the third version of this, and the first two that you pitched were like really focused on these people, and it really is like an artsy fartsy moody character driven piece.
Mhm.
um yeah, one or the other. We can't have our cake and eat it too.
Yeah, we have three good pitches for a
Yes.
Ferrari movie.
Yes.
Each
Yep.
of them much more narrow in scope, but I think because the focus is narrow, then you can better set the stakes and better explore some things rather than us having to be so divided across multiple things to have to think about.
Yep. Yep. No, that's so true. That's so true. And even in that race focused film,
Mhm.
it doesn't necessarily have to be the, slightly more simplistic character creations in Ford v Ferrari, which definitely paint a more, straightforward picture of the
Mhm.
conflict and the tensions and who the people were. Like, I actually think that a lot of what this film is interested in about Enzo's character, there's a lot of his like risk-taking tendencies, a lot of his like emotionally distant uh approach to things. There's a lot of his like anxiety woven in there. Like all of that can still be brought out through some of the moments and tensions that come up when we are preparing for this very big race that his entire career and the family business is riding on. Like that actually can maybe usher those aspects in even more effectively than this movie does, because there's a lot of dialogue in the first hour of this movie, and it's not really clear what our purpose is. But if we have a purpose, then we can really allow for some of those character moments to breathe a little bit more without them feeling a little bit un kind of a little bit like we're wandering through a portrait about a person. No, we've got a goal, and while we're on the way to accomplish this goal, we're learning a lot about this person. If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, the race is the vehicle to explore the character, and I think that's a formula that just works because, like you said, we have a goal, we know what we're working toward, so mentally we know where we're going and we have a blueprint, and so then that just helps give some guardrails for us as the audience to be able to, like, gather other information, because if we don't know what our goal is, if we don't know what we're doing, then it's harder to focus on things and it's easier to feel a little bit lost, and then it's easier to disengage from the story. And so I think making the race this goal and explaining we have to win, and showing how that affects not only Enzo's life but the company, all of these drivers, like setting the stakes for that. And then along the way we can explore who Enzo is as a person based on how he's reacting to all of these other things. I think that that could have been a much more effective movie because we are focused, we have a goal, and so then we don't get distracted or disengaged from the story, where the current version of Ferrari, it's very easy to disengage because we don't know what we're doing or where we're going.
Yep. Yep. Totally agree. Totally agree. Okay, with the last couple minutes, any other things that we wanted to mention? I've got, I think, two things on my list.
I also have two things on my list.
Okay, what's you do one and I'll do one, and then we'll go
Okay,
back and
great.
forth.
Okay, I'm gonna start with my more serious thing that I thought was kind of interesting about this. There is that scene in the church where the priest, I guess, is giving this sermon about, Jesus was a carpenter, but if he was born here, then he would have been a metal worker. And he was explaining about the engines and all of these things. And so you can see how racing is so intertwined in this town, and how having Ferrari in this town has, I mean, that's their whole identity. And I thought that that was really fascinating, and it made me think about how, when sports teams come to a city, like, sure, it's a lot of cost, but it also helps shape the identity of that city. And so I thought that that was just a really interesting thing that the movie included, and I think it's a really fascinating thing to think about, that sports aren't just entertainment, but can actually have like a real economic impact on a city and can help shape the culture of that city, just like we saw in this movie.
Yes, that's so interesting, and potentially even beyond just the economic implications, but even the like sense of purpose and meaning, and the,
Mhm.
like the fact that
Yeah.
it's part of that it was in a church scene, that being such an intentional choice. I mean, there's been so many, significant sports events. I'm thinking about one of the years in the Olympics where the winner of certain sports games or matches felt like a political
Hmm.
triumph as well. There was a sense
Yeah.
of like national pride that we defeated the Germans in the sport or whatever it might have been, and so that like larger like metaphorical aspects of sports, and the way that it feels significant beyond just the sport itself is so huge. So that scene being in a church is also just like such a well designed scene. Honestly, there's some good things that this movie does.
Yeah,
No.
yeah. I think that was one of the more interesting scenes for me, and it was also super exciting because you go from the church, and then you go to the racetrack, and the church and the racetrack, and you can see how all of these things are so intertwined in these people's lives and in this culture. And I don't know, I just that was one of my favorite scenes in this because it was exciting, it was interesting. I was thinking about all sorts of things. I was fully engaged in that church service, unlike Ferrari, who was on the racetrack in his brain.
That scene, I was wondering if they were heavily inspired by the baptism scene in The Godfather, because it felt
Mhm.
so resonant of like, let's constantly cut together these two seemingly very disparate things, but actually there's a lot of connection point between the two of them, and here's this incredibly spiritual place and this service, and then you're cutting in like these high octane like engines roaring, and we're at the racetrack, and I just thought that was like such an I'm sure it was inspired by that baptism scene in The Godfather, so that was kind of neat.
Absolutely. That's also why it was so good.
Mm-hmm.
It's The
Yeah.
Godfather.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and every time that the car would go by, you see that gain speed again and again and again.
Mhm.
I thought that was really smart. See
Yeah.
if the film could do more of that. Could
Yes.
be down.
Yeah.
Could be down.
Okay. What was your thing?
My thing was there are a couple of really funny lines that are integrated in this movie that kind of come from left field, from Enzo. Like I mean, obviously the mom has a couple of funny moments, but I wanted more of that, just like super dry, like out of left field humor in like a very serious scene, but just Enzo will deliver a line. I'm like, this we could have done more of this, y'all. Like there's a couple of those moments. There's not a lot of them. I can think of maybe like three or four. But in our version of this movie that is focused on the racing, like I think there could have been a little bit more of that. This movie's pretty somber for most of it, and I think the little bit of levity also just is it's fascinating to see this the style of humor that Enzo Ferrari like has and maybe would have. I don't know if how heavily it is rooted in the actual person, but it's part of character building as well. And so I wanted a little bit more of that. I think it could have been really fun.
Oh yeah, I totally agree. Like, humor is so important in a movie. I think especially in a more dramatic movie,
Yeah,
you need those moments of, I don't know, humor to lift you out of the slog that you're in,
yeah,
like, and Enzo is going through a slog. Like, this is an unpleasant time in this man's life, and we are walking through that with him, and we need moments. We need a break.
yeah.
So I feel like
We
humor
did.
does that, and humor also reveals a lot about a
Yes.
character too.
Yeah.
Like, when you joke and how you joke can reveal a lot about who you are without having to like say this is who I am. And so I feel like they could have better utilized that to help us as the audience stay engaged in the story and reveal more about the character, two things that this movie kind of struggles with.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think we could have leaned into that a little bit more. We get a few little bits, but I wanted more.
It wasn't enough.
Okay, what's your second thing?
My second thing is there were points in this movie where it felt like there was no good take, and so they just had to use the best of bad options. And I had that thought like multiple times throughout the movie, cuz some of the ways that it's edited together just didn't feel intuitive to me. And so I was like, wait,
Mm,
why are we making these choices? And so the one example of this that really bothered me, and it might, I don't know if it was just my theater, so I'm curious if you noticed this or what your experience was, but at the end, when Enzo is with his son in the cemetery, they're seated and they're talking, and life is great, sounds great, wonderful. Then they get up and they start walking. And the gravel of and them walking on the gravel is so loud. So then all of the volume had to be turned up so that we could hear what they were saying. And the volume
mm,
of that scene is so much louder than the previous scene that I was like, what are we doing? Like, this is horrible. What happened here, and why is this
mm.
gravel so loud that is the primary thing that you hear in the scene? I don't know, maybe it was just my theater, it jacked up the sound, I don't know, but that was one of those where I was like, this feels like amateurish to me, but this cost a
Mm.
gajillion dollars to make. Oh my gosh, like, why
Yeah.
couldn't we get a better take where you're not having to deal with people walking on gravel? I don't know. Maybe it's just me.
I didn't notice that as much, but again, I often focus on very different things when we watch movies. So it could be a me thing too, but yeah, I was kind of like in that scene, I was like, "Oh, this is the scene we're ending on?" Oh, okay. That seems like a very
Mhm.
interesting choice as far as like the thesis of what this film's focused on. That's where my brain was. Uh, but no, yeah, that's really odd. That's very odd. And it sounds like there were several scenes, not just that one that could have been an anomaly,
Mhm.
but that there were
Yeah.
several scenes that were like that for you.
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah, there were a couple other ones where the camera would, like, cut away and then cut back in ways that didn't make sense to me, and, like, not everything needs to make sense to me, but there were times where it didn't feel like, "Oh, this is an intentional choice." It felt like,
Mm.
"Oh, we're trying to, like, cover up this thing, so we have to cut to a different angle, and then we have to cut back." Like, I don't know. And it could just be
See.
me, but there were multiple times where I was like, "Why did you make that choice? What what else was going on here that made you make that choice? Because that's not intuitive for this scene." But
Mm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
what do I know? I'm not an editor. I'm not a cinematographer, so maybe it was just me.
No, no, I'm those little details matter, and that balance and sound, or the way that a shot's constructed, they all matter. My similar spirit, different thing is just Shailene Woodley's accent. Just
Oh,
I'm usually like pretty chill as far as accents bothering me. Like I people will be like, that accent was terrible. I'm like, yeah, I was focused on something else, I'm sure. But that her accent genuinely was so distracting to me in every scene that she was in. It almost felt like some sentences she would say in an American accent, and the next sentence would be like an attempt at an Italian accent, and then we just are flipping back and forth within like an entire conversation. So I needed her to either practice that a little bit more or figure out someone else that could have nailed that Italian accent better. It just is one of those things where I was like, how did this even like make it onto set? And we were just fine with it. Like, was there not higher standards for this? I have many questions.
yeah, I also have questions. I think she's just horribly miscast in this. I
Mm-hmm.
don't think that she's a bad actress. I've seen her in things where I'm like, "Oh no, you're
Yeah.
actually pretty good." She is bad in this. And that's unfortunate because I think if that character had been stronger, that really would have helped, be that
Yeah.
foil to Laura. And I think that that would have helped this movie be even better. But because Shailene Woodley's performance is just not great, uh, I don't know. Those scenes are particularly rough to get through. And
Yes.
I so like I think somebody else needed to be cast, number one. But like if you're gonna
Mm-hmm.
keep her with this weird American slash attempt at an Italian accent, like let's just change the character and just have her be like an American who moved to Italy.
Yes.
I don't know anything about like Lena's actual life, but include something to explain why her accent isn't right. And
Yeah.
then we would be much more forgiving. But yeah, it was rough.
Yeah. The whole time I'm like, why would you just go back to Laura? Like
Right?
she's a G. She's an absolute
Yes,
G. Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. The other I tend to be much more bothered by accents than
Oh.
than you are. So Patrick Dempsey's accent also did bother me. It wasn't as much as Shailene Woodley's, but there were times when I was like, "Oh, do you do you have to be talking right now?" Like why? But it was cool to see him in this because he
Yeah.
actually does race cars, and like he
Oh
owns
wow.
race cars and like does the whole thing. So that was really really cool to see him in this and being able to play such a famous driver. So I was like,
That's cool.
okay, I'm willing to forgive you just a little bit more because this is a really cool thing that you actually do in your life. But his accent wasn't great.
Just give him a couple less lines.
Yeah. Because
Yeah.
he does a
That's so
lot
funny.
like when he's not talking. So just
Mm-hmm.
less is more.
Yes. Yes. Well, the accent's bad when even I notice it. So
Yeah, yeah, it's pretty bad. I
it's pretty
again
bad.
like how did that make it into the final film? Like
That's what I'm
how
saying.
was this
Yeah.
the best of all of the options? I
Yeah.
I don't understand.
Yeah. Exactly. That was my thought. And every time she's on screen, like, why did we not just, how did this make the cut? Why was this
Mm,
okay?
yeah. I
Well,
guess we will never know. And
no,
that's all right.
no, yep. All right. Well, this is our review and discussion of Ferrari. You can find it available out in theaters. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Movies and Us. Our name sums it up. We're all about movies and the powerful ways we can connect with each other and the world around us. This podcast is about all of us and our shared stories. So everyone is welcome here, and we're so glad you spent time with us today. You can subscribe to this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or wherever you tune into your favorite shows. Drop us a rating and review letting us know your thoughts about Ferrari. You can connect with us on Instagram and Twitter at moviesandUsPod, or email us at moviesandUsPod@gmail.com. We will be back next week to do our annual tradition here on the Movies and Us podcast, where we go through our top 10 lists of films we've watched in the past year in 2023. Always a good time, always fascinating. I'm intrigued to see what you've got on your list this year, what collection of movies you have.
Yeah, this should be really, really fun. I am excited.
Yeah, it's always a really good time and a great way to wrap up the year of movies, celebrating the ones we loved as we head into a new year, getting excited for the movies that we will watch in 2024. So we hope you have an amazing week, and we hope to see you very soon.